The party was a monument to my father's success. 60 of the city's most powerful people were scattered across our grand ballroom, their laughter echoing off the high gilded ceilings. It was my father's 60th birthday, and my stepmother, Brenda, had orchestrated an event that was less a celebration and more a display of wealth and status. I stood near the French doors, trying to make myself as small as possible. Parties like this were Brenda's world, not mine. I was a data analyst at my father's company, a quiet girl who preferred spreadsheets to small talk. Brenda was holding court in the center of the room. She was wearing a stunning, floor-length white gown that must have cost a fortune. She looked like a queen, and she knew it. She caught my eye from across the room, and her perfect smile tightened just a fraction. In her eyes, I was a problem. I was the quiet, mousy daughter of her husband's first wife, a living reminder that she was not the original queen of this castle. I saw it happen in slow motion. A young waiter, his face beaded with sweat, was navigating the crowd with a heavy tray of red wine glasses. He was trying to get past Brenda. I saw her glance at him, then at me. A strange, calculating look flickered in her eyes. As the waiter passed, she took a small, deliberate step backward, bumping his arm. The tray tilted. A dozen glasses of red wine cascaded down the front of her pristine white dress, a violent crimson stain against the perfect white. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda let out a theatrical shriek. Tears, instant and dramatic, welled in her eyes. She didn't look at the waiter. She pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at me. "She did it!" she cried, her voice breaking with a perfectly performed sob. "Amelia tripped him. She did it on purpose. She's always been jealous of me." The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to me. The waiter, pale with shock, just stood there, frozen. My father, who had been laughing with a business partner, turned around. He saw Brenda, her dress ruined, crying. He saw her finger pointing at me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look for another explanation. He just reacted. His face, which had been so full of joy moments before, contorted into a mask of pure fury. He strode across the room and stood before me, his large frame blocking out the light. "What is wrong with you?" he boomed, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "How dare you try to ruin this night? How dare you try to humiliate my wife?" "Dad, I didn't," I started to say, but he cut me off. "I don't want to hear it," he roared. He was not my father in that moment. He was a CEO, a king, dressing down a subordinate in front of his entire court. He was treating me like a child, a naughty, petulant toddler who had made a mess. "That's it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're grounded. Go to your room, now, and you will stay there until you learn to respect my wife." Grounded. I was 24 years old. I was a university graduate. I was an employee at his company. And in front of 60 of the most influential people in the city, my own father had just grounded me like a child. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over me. I could feel the stares of the guests, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I looked at Brenda, who was now hiding her face in my father's chest, her shoulders shaking with fake sobs. Over his shoulder, she met my eyes, and for a split second, I saw a flash of pure, triumphant victory. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. It was useless. He had already made his choice. I just looked at my father, at his angry, disappointed face. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see the cold, clear calm that was settling over my shock. Then, I turned. With my head held high, I walked out of the ballroom, through the grand foyer, and up the sweeping main staircase. Every step was deliberate. Every eye in the room was on me. They thought they were watching a shamed child being sent to her room. They had no idea they were watching a data analyst who had just been given all the motivation she needed to pull a single critical thread that would unravel their entire world. The grand staircase felt like a mile long. With every step, I could feel the weight of my father's new life, a life that had no room for me. This house, the one I had grown up in, no longer felt like my home. It was Brenda's kingdom now. My mother passed away from cancer when I was in high school. She was the heart of our family, a warm, brilliant woman who had been my father's partner in every sense of the word. They had built his logistics empire together from the ground up. After she was gone, the house lost its color. My father, lost in his grief, threw himself into his work, and I retreated into my studies. He met Brenda at a charity gala 2 years ago. She was a recent divorcee, a socialite with expensive taste, and a talent for finding wealthy, lonely men. She was everything my mother was not. Where my mother was warm and genuine, Brenda was polished and performative. Where my mother valued intelligence and hard work, Brenda valued status and appearances. My father, however, was smitten. He was lonely, and Brenda filled the silence with her loud laughter and endless social calendar. She made him feel alive again. They were married within 6 months. From the day she moved in, Brenda began a quiet, systematic campaign to erase my mother's memory. It started small. The family photos on the mantelpiece were the first to go, replaced by posed, professional shots of her and my father. Then she started redecorating. My mother had loved warm, earthy tones and comfortable, classic furniture. Brenda painted everything white, stark, cold, gallery white. She replaced the comfortable sofas with low, modern pieces that were beautiful to look at, but impossible to relax on. "This house just needed a woman's touch, don't you think, darling?" she would say to my father, who would nod in agreement, completely blind to the fact that she was wallpapering over his past. She was especially hostile towards me. I was the living, breathing reminder of the first wife, the real queen of this castle. She saw my quiet nature as a judgment, my presence as a threat. She would make subtle digs at my job. After I graduated with a degree in data science, I had taken a junior analyst position at my father's company. It was my own choice. I wanted to learn the business from the ground up, to understand the data that made the whole empire run. Brenda saw it as a failure. "Still playing with numbers in the basement, Amelia?" she would ask at the dinner table. "Don't you want a real job, something with a bit more glamour?" She would criticize my clothes, my hair, my lack of a bustling social life. I was too quiet, too serious, too much like my mother. My father, desperate to keep the peace in his new marriage, was willfully blind to it all. Whenever I tried to talk to him about Brenda's comments, he would get defensive. "You're being too sensitive, Amelia," he'd say with a sigh. "Brenda is just trying to connect with you. You need to make more of an effort. She's your mother now." She was not my mother, she was a usurper. The final piece of her takeover was when my father gave her a job at the company. He created a vanity title for her, Director of Accounts. He thought it would give her a sense of purpose. What it really gave her was power. She was put in charge of approving payments and invoices, a position of authority she had no qualifications for, but one she relished. She loved being able to sign her name, to feel important. She had slowly, methodically pushed me out of my father's heart and out of my own home. The public humiliation at the party, the grounding, it wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the culmination of a 2-year campaign. It was her final, triumphant declaration that she had won. She was the new queen. I was nothing but a disobedient child to be sent to her room. As I closed the door to my childhood bedroom, the room she hadn't gotten around to redecorating yet, I looked at the picture of my real mother on my bedside table. Brenda thought she had won the battle for the house, for my father. She had no idea that I was about to win the war for my mother's legacy. And the key was a single, tiny mistake she had made, a mistake she didn't even know existed. The mistake was for $48.99. In a multi-billion-dollar global logistics company, it was less than a rounding error. It was a speck of dust, invisible to almost everyone. But my job was to find the specks of dust. As a junior data analyst, I spent my days staring at the endless rivers of data that flowed through our company, looking for patterns, for anomalies, for the tiny single data point that was out of place. About a month before the party, I was running a routine audit of the accounts payable logs. I was looking for overdue invoices, a common but manageable problem. My program flagged one. It was an invoice from a third-party insurance provider. The amount was tiny, $48.999. The description was for a supplementary weather hazard premium. I pulled up the associated shipping manifest. My eyes widened. The invoice was for a single, massive shipment of high-end electronics destined for a major retailer in Japan. This client was our biggest contract, the cornerstone of our international business. The shipment itself was worth tens of millions of dollars. I dug deeper. The standard company insurance covered most things, but for high-value cargo going through a specific Pacific shipping lane during typhoon season, our policy required a small, supplementary premium to be paid. It was a tiny, extra layer of protection against a catastrophic weather event. It was a non-negotiable part of the contract with the client. If that premium wasn't paid, the main insurance policy for that specific shipment would be void. The invoice was 2 weeks overdue. My program showed me the payment history. The invoice had been received, processed, and then flagged for a final review by the Director of Accounts. And then, nothing. It had been dismissed. I checked the digital signature of the person who had dismissed it. B.H. Brenda. My heart started to pound. She wouldn't have understood what it was. She would have seen the amount, $48,999, and thought it was a mistake. A piece of digital junk mail. She would have deleted it with a flick of her wrist, annoyed that a low-level clerk was bothering her with such a trivial amount. She had no idea that her casual, ignorant dismissal had just left a $30 million hole in our company's safety net. I had to do something, but I was in a difficult position. I was a junior analyst. She was the CEO's wife, a director. If I went over her head directly to my father, it would look like I was trying to sabotage her. Given our strained relationship, he would believe her over me. He would see it as another act of childish jealousy. I had to follow the proper channels. I had to create a paper trail. I forwarded the automated alert for the unpaid invoice directly to Brenda's office email address. I added a personal note at the top, flagging it with a red, urgent tag. Brenda, I wrote, keeping my tone professional and neutral. This invoice for $48,989 is a time-sensitive, critical insurance premium for shipment number 74B. The deadline for payment has passed. Failure to pay will void the primary insurance policy for the entire shipment. Please advise. I sent the email. The system showed me that it was delivered. A few minutes later, the system showed me that it had been read. And then, a minute after that, it showed me that it had been deleted. She hadn't replied. She hadn't forwarded it. She hadn't paid it. She had read my urgent warning and had simply, arrogantly, deleted it. She was annoyed that the little girl in the basement was telling her how to do her job. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was bad. This was catastrophically bad. But I had done what I could. I had followed the protocol, and I had documented everything. I took a screenshot of the unpaid invoice. I took a screenshot of the alert showing her initials on the dismissal. I saved a copy of the email I had sent her, complete with the timestamp showing when it was delivered, when it was read, and when it was deleted. I compiled it all into a single password-protected file on a secure personal USB drive. I named the file the $48 mistake. I hoped I would never have to open it. I hoped the shipment would arrive safely, that the weather would hold, and that her incompetence would have no consequences. But I was a data analyst. I believed in risk assessment, and I knew that sometimes the smallest specks of dust can trigger an avalanche. The night of the party, I had genuinely tried to make peace. I wore a new dress, a quiet but elegant gray silk that I hoped would be inoffensive enough to fly under Brenda's critical radar. I had mingled, I had smiled, I had complimented my father on his speech and Brenda on the beautiful decorations. I was playing the part of the dutiful daughter, hoping for a night free of drama, but Brenda was not interested in peace. She was interested in power, and her power was directly tied to my submission. She needed to remind everyone in that room, especially my father, that she was the new queen and I was a relic of the old regime. I saw it in her eyes all night. Every time my father would laugh at a story I told, or an old family friend would pull me into a warm hug, I would catch a glimpse of her watching me, her smile tight, her eyes like chips of ice. She saw any affection directed at me as a threat to her own position. The incident with the waiter was not an accident. It was an ambush. executed with a predator's precision. I had been talking to Mr. Henderson, a senior board member, and a dear old friend of my mother's. He was a kind, grandfatherly man who always made a point of seeking me out at these events. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Amelia," he was saying, his eyes twinkling. "You have her mind for details. I see your reports, you know. Your analysis is brilliant." I felt a warm blush of pleasure. It was rare for anyone in my father's world to acknowledge my work. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That means a lot." It was at that moment that Brenda made her move. I saw the young waiter approaching, his tray laden with glasses of deep red wine. He was trying to navigate the crowded space between our small group and the one Brenda was holding court in. I saw him falter slightly as someone bumped into him. My instinct was to help. I reached out a hand to steady the tray. "Careful there," I said quietly. And that's when Brenda saw her chance. She was talking to a group of her friends, but her eyes were on me. She saw me reach for the tray. She saw the opportunity. With a movement that was almost imperceptible to anyone not watching for it, she took a small step backward, directly into the waiter's path. Her shoulder bumped his arm. It was a tiny, seemingly accidental movement. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The tray tilted violently. The waiter, losing his balance, stumbled forward. The red wine, like a tidal wave, surged from the glasses and cascaded directly down the front of Brenda's pristine white gown. The performance that followed was worthy of an Oscar. The shriek of horror, the perfectly timed tears, the trembling finger pointing at me, the innocent bystander who had been trying to help. "She did it! Amelia tripped him!" The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it stunned the room into silence. No one had seen what really happened. They had only seen the aftermath, the clumsy waiter, the ruined dress, and my hand, which had been reaching out to help, now frozen in mid-air, looking for all the world like it had just committed the crime. My father, seeing only his crying wife and my outstretched hand, filled in the blanks with his own preconceived notions of my jealousy. He didn't ask. He didn't investigate. He convicted me on the spot. As he yelled at me, as he grounded me in front of 200 people, I looked past him at Brenda. She was hiding her face in his chest, but for a split second she glanced up at me. And in her eyes I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had won. She had successfully painted me as a petty, jealous child and reinforced her own position as the wronged, beloved wife. As I walked up that grand staircase, the weight of every eye in the room on my back, I wasn't just feeling humiliation. I was feeling a strange sense of liberation. The part of me that had been trying so hard to please them, to fit in, to keep the peace, had finally given up. She had been wrong. There was no peace to be kept. There was only a war to be won. And she had just handed me the perfect justification to use the weapon I had hidden away. The game had changed, and she had no idea what the new rules were. My childhood bedroom was a time capsule. Brenda, in her whirlwind of redecoration, hadn't gotten around to this wing of the house yet. The walls were still the same pale blue. My old books were still on the shelves. A framed photo of my mother and me sat on the bedside table. It felt like a room belonging to a different person, a girl who believed in happy endings. But I was not there to be sentimental. My father had grounded me, sent me to my room like a naughty child. He expected me to sit on my bed and cry, to feel ashamed of my behavior. He had no idea that he had just given me exactly what I needed: time, privacy, and a reason to act. I didn't cry. I didn't sulk. I sat down at my old desk, opened my laptop, and went to work. The party downstairs, the music, the laughter, it was all just distant noise. My world was now a screen of data. I pulled up the file I had named the $48 mistake. All the evidence was there: the unpaid invoice, Brenda's digital signature on the dismissal, the time-stamped record of my ignored warning email. It was a perfect, closed loop of incompetence. But it wasn't enough. I didn't just want to prove she had made a mistake. I wanted to show the exact catastrophic consequences of that mistake. I logged into the company's global logistics network, the software I knew better than anyone. I entered the tracking number for shipment number 74B. A map of the Pacific Ocean appeared on my screen, a tiny icon of a cargo ship slowly making its way towards Japan. Then I opened another window, a real-time meteorological map from the National Weather Service. My blood ran cold. A storm, a small tropical depression when the ship had left port, had been upgraded. It was now a Category 3 hurricane, and it was churning directly across the shipping lane. The ship was sailing straight into the jaws of the beast. For the next 72 hours, my room became a command center. I barely slept. I had trays of food sent up which I barely touched. Downstairs, my father maintained his stony silence. He was punishing me, waiting for an apology that would never come. Brenda, I'm sure, was reveling in her victory, enjoying her role as the wronged wife. They were living in a petty family drama, completely oblivious to the multi-million-dollar disaster that was unfolding on the other side of the world. I became a storm tracker. I watched as the hurricane grew in power, its swirling vortex a terrifying thing of beauty on the satellite maps. I cross-referenced its projected path with the ship's GPS coordinates. The intersection was unavoidable. I compiled a new report, a detailed minute-by-minute timeline. 72 hours ago, Hurricane Clara upgraded to Category 3, winds at 115 mm. 60 hours ago, shipment 74B enters the primary storm quadrant. Standard protocol would be to divert. No course correction made. 48 hours ago, the shipping company sends a Level 1 alert to our corporate office regarding the storm. The alert is automatically routed to the risk management department. No response. I documented everything. I took screenshots of the weather data, the ship's coordinates, the ignored alerts. I attached the original client contract, highlighting the section on insurance requirements and the massive financial penalties for lost or damaged cargo. I calculated the total value of the shipment and the exact amount of the penalty clause. The number had a lot of zeros. I was not a vengeful daughter trying to get back at her stepmother. I was a data analyst preparing a post-mortem report on a catastrophic system failure. The failure just happened to have a name: Brenda. On the third morning, I woke up from a short, restless nap to a flurry of alerts on my laptop. The ship had made it through the storm, but it had been battered. The captain was reporting a significant loss of cargo from the main deck, containers swept overboard by a monster wave. He was sending a list of the lost container numbers. My heart pounded as I cross-referenced the numbers with the manifest for shipment 74B. Every single one of them matched. The entire $30 million shipment of electronics was now at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and it was completely uninsured. The silence in my room was absolute. The storm outside was over. The storm inside my father's company was about to begin, and I was holding the lightning. The news hit the company like a tsunami. It started as a low rumble in the logistics department on the third morning after the party, then quickly escalated into a full-blown 5-alarm fire that shot straight to the top floor. I knew the moment my father found out. I was still in my room, my self-imposed exile, when I heard his office door slam downstairs with enough force to rattle the windows. A few moments later, his voice, a furious, panicked roar, echoed up the staircase. "What do you mean, lost? How do you lose an entire shipment? How is that possible?" I could hear him yelling into his phone, his voice a mixture of disbelief and pure rage. He was a man who prided himself on control, on running a tight ship. A mistake of this magnitude was not just a financial disaster, it was a personal insult to his competence. The next few hours were chaos. I listened from my room as a parade of terrified executives were summoned to the house. I could hear the muffled sounds of shouting from my father's study. He was on a warpath. He was looking for someone to blame, someone to fire, someone to sacrifice to the board of directors. The official news broke in the financial press that afternoon. Logistics giant faces catastrophic cargo loss in Pacific hurricane. The article mentioned that their biggest client was immediately invoking the penalty clause in their contract, a financial hit that would be devastating. It also mentioned in a single, brutal sentence that there were unconfirmed reports of a lapse in the shipment's insurance coverage. The company's stock, which had been a pillar of stability for years, began to plummet. My father called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. He was in full crisis mode, determined to find the low-level accountant, the incompetent fool who had made this unforgivable error. He was going to make an example of them. That evening, Brenda came to my room. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and stood there, a smug, pitying look on her face. "I suppose you've heard what's happening," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Your father is under a tremendous amount of stress. A terrible mistake was made by someone in accounting. People are going to be fired, of course." She looked at me, her eyes full of fake sympathy. "It's a shame, really. This is why you need to be careful in a big company. One little mistake, and your career is over. It's a good thing you just have your little analyst job. Less responsibility, you know." She thought I was irrelevant. A quiet girl in the basement who played with numbers, completely removed from the high-stakes drama unfolding on the top floor. She was here to gloat, to remind me of my own insignificance in the face of this massive corporate crisis. She had no idea that she was the star of the show. "I'm sure Dad will sort it out," I said, my voice neutral, my eyes on the book I was pretending to read. "Of course he will," she said with a confident sniff. "He always does." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "By the way," she said, "your father has decided you've been in your room long enough. Your grounding is over. You can come out now." She said it with the magnanimous air of a queen pardoning a lowly subject. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, not looking up from my book. "That's very generous of you." She left, closing the door behind her, satisfied that she had once again put me in my place. I waited a full minute, then closed my book. I stood up and walked to my closet. My grounding was over. She was right about that. It was time for me to come out. I didn't reach for my usual simple clothes. I reached for the charcoal gray power suit I kept in the back of the closet for shareholder meetings. I laid it out on the bed. I took out a pair of sharp professional heels. The emergency board meeting was at 9 a.m. I was not on the attendance list, but I was going to be there. The time for hiding in my room was over. The time for data was here. And I had a final report to deliver. The boardroom was a chamber of silent, expensive panic. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of the board members. My father stood at the head of the table, his face pale, his hands gripping the back of his chair. He looked like a king whose kingdom was on fire. Brenda was there too. She sat in a chair just behind my father, playing the part of the supportive, worried wife. She wore a somber black dress, her expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. She had no idea she was a guest at her own execution. "I will not stand for this level of incompetence," my father was ranting, his voice echoing in the tense room. "A mistake of this magnitude is unforgivable. Someone in the accounting department failed to process a simple insurance payment. A simple payment. And now this company is facing a loss that could set us back a decade. I want a name. I want the person responsible for this, and I want them out of my company by noon." The chief financial officer, a man who was sweating through his expensive suit, started to stammer an apology. "Robert, we're still investigating the logs. The payment was flagged, but then it seems to have been dismissed at the executive level." "Dismissed?" my father roared. "What executive would be foolish enough to dismiss a critical insurance payment?" It was the perfect cue. The heavy boardroom doors opened. I walked in. Every head turned. The room fell into a stunned silence. I was not the disheveled, grounded child they had seen at the party. I was wearing my charcoal gray power suit, my hair was pulled back in a severe knot, and my face was calm and composed. I was holding a single, thin, blue file folder. My father stared at me, his mouth agape. "Amelia? What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting." Brenda looked at me with pure, undisguised venom. She thought this was another one of my dramatic attempts to get attention. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone else. I walked directly to the head of the table and stood opposite my father. "I believe I have the information you were looking for," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence. I opened the blue file and placed a single sheet of paper on the polished table in front of him. I slid it across to him. It was a printout of the unpaid invoice for $48.99. At the bottom of the page was the digital audit trail. It showed the invoice being flagged for review, and then, next to the word action, was a single damning word: dismissed. And next to that, the digital signature of the executive who had dismissed it. B.A.H. My father stared at the initials. He looked up at Brenda, a dawning, horrified comprehension on his face. Brenda, seeing his expression, leaned forward to look at the paper. She saw her own initials, and the color drained from her face. "That's not all," I said. I took out a second piece of paper. It was a printout of the urgent email I had sent her, the one warning her that the policy would be voided. At the bottom was the digital record: read at 2:15 p.m., deleted at 2:16 p.m. "I followed protocol," I said calmly. "The system flagged the error. I flagged the error. The warning was ignored." The board members were leaning forward, staring at the papers, then at Brenda, their expressions turning from confusion to cold fury. Mr. Henderson, my mother's old friend, looked at me from across the table, and I saw a flicker of profound pride in his eyes. My father looked at Brenda, his new, beautiful wife, the woman he had defended, the woman for whom he had humiliated his own daughter, and he finally saw her for what she was: not a queen, not a partner, but a vain, incompetent woman whose careless arrogance had just brought his empire to its knees. "Brenda," he whispered, his voice a choked, broken sound. She just sat there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. I looked at my father, at the ruins of his company, at the ashes of his second marriage. I had not yelled. I had not cried. I had simply presented the data. "I believe this is what you were looking for," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them to the deafening silence and the catastrophic consequences of a single $48 mistake.